Hi, and welcome to the final special episode of All Things Gambling Casino Gurus webinar series. Today marks a unique assembly of gambling experts who've joined forces to decide the winners of prestigious Casino Guru Awards, but also to discuss important issues that shape the gambling industry as a whole. And today is about the importance of prevention in achieving safer gambling. My name is Denisa Vidumova, and my special guest today is Tracy Parker, Vice President, Policy, Standards, and Accreditation at Responsible Gambling Council. Welcome, Tracy, and thank you very much for coming.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
For those who may not know you, could you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us about you, your line of work, what do you do, what are your passions?
Thank you very much. As you said, I'm with the Responsible Gambling Council. We're not-for-profit based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We do a multiple of different programs, both B2C, direct player education and prevention work, as well as a lot of B2B work with industry, with regulators on research, evaluation, accreditation specifically. Yeah. So quite a wide variety of activities at the Responsible Gambling Council.
That's right. Okay, so let's just get started with my first question because it's a burning one. Tracy, is prevention something that the gambling industry has taken note of in 2023? Do we see active policies that build responsible gambling safeguards that are based on prevention more so than the treatment?
I think so. And I think you see it evolving differently for different lines of business. So whether it's in land-based or online or with sports betting, or even lottery retailers, sort of different maturity and at different markets in different jurisdictions. I think that sort of plays into it quite a bit. Where you sort of see a lot of sort of uptake and activity is when the concept has been baked into the idea of customer service and customer experience. When you hear operators talk about building a sustainable player base, then, in order to do that, they need to identify harm, prevent harm, mitigate harm, to do that and have that a player base that they can have for the long term. So I think when you see activities in that space, across different lines of business with different jurisdictions, I like to use a car analogy. We often hear about like the tools and seat belts, right? Like we want the players to feel as comfortable using limit setting tools as they do for a seat belt. But right when you get into a car, you've had some driving lessons, you've had some training and a test. You have a dashboard, you have guardrails when you're driving down the highway. You have road signs, you have stop signs, you have yields, you have like turn ahead, you have caution, and so I think it's building in the equivalent into the gambling experience, both from an educational perspective, but also from a structural perspective that can really heighten prevention and work to mitigate harm.
Yeah, I've heard a comparison to, customer protection, I guess, with the security at the airport. It was something like that. And sticking to the subject of comparing prevention and treatment, what do you think is more effective or productive? Like, avoiding gambling harm in the first place, but I guess it's also very important to treat the gambling harm after it's done. So
absolutely, and I don't think we need to choose, we need to do both. I think a lot of the work we can do in prevention can lessen the likelihood and maybe the severity of harm. Yeah. But at the end of the day, when harm occurs, it needs to be addressed. It needs to be mitigated. I have another analogy for you.
Oh, let's go.
At a swimming pool, right? Like the job of the lifeguard is to keep people safe, to keep people out of the deep end who shouldn't be in the deep end.
Avoid the harm,
right? And, no running on the sides and that kind of thing. But and at the same time, they're also, looking for signs of someone struggling, someone who may be drowning.
Yeah.
And the importance of all of those activities, you can't lose focus on any of them. Like it's not a choice of either or, but it really is about, tools and the activities to do both.
Yeah. I'm going to suggest that prevention is fairly a new concept in the gambling industry, right? Do you think stakeholders are right now focusing on its buzzworthiness without really understanding what the core idea is in the first
I
place?
think maybe, and because I know I've had conversations. And especially the term responsible gambling, you start talking and you realize they're actually talking about problem gambling, not,
Mm-hmm.
the prevention side. And so you can kind of lead the conversation in a certain direction. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think that they're talking about it, they're learning about it, you can look for the right motivations, but if the intention and if there's then some action and activity and some rigor put behind that and some learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so if you start using the words and then you want to know what the words mean and what activities support that, then I think there's, that if that's where it starts, if it starts as a trend, if it starts as a buzz, I'll take it, right?
Yeah.
Like if it gets the job done and it gets the work done, then I think we're on the right track.
Absolutely. Eventually, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just...
And people come at it from different points of view, right? Like you might find companies that have a strong leader who've initiated it. You might have an internal champion somewhere in the organization. It might be an external push from a regulator. It might be a trend and a buzz that they want to be part of. Every company, just same as every player, have different needs and different entry points. So do operators on the journey. So I'll take it. Yeah.
My next question is, if we can truly prevent gambling harm, you know what I mean? Is it even possible? Is maybe industry doing too little, or where are we?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, I think it's really a good ambition to have harm prevention and to prevent all harm. And it drives. We start asking the right questions when we have big ambitions.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. I also think that there is it really relies and progress really relies on a culture of continuous improvement.
Okay.
And learning, in an ongoing way. So I don't think we'll ever be done. I mean, and I do think there's prevention activities where we can, like I was saying before, lessen the likelihood and lessen the severity. And going back to the car analogy, right? Like there's still road accidents. People's cars still break down.
Yeah.
People still run out of gas, even though we have the gate, right? Like there are a lot of precautions in place on the roads, but there's still the chance and there's still the likelihood. But we still, I mean, I think it's really important to stay on the ambition because, like I say, it leads us to improvements and betterments, and it starts us asking the right kinds of questions.
Yeah, that's definitely right. Do you think we need more regulatory guidance on how to implement the prevention, and who should guide the conversation around the prevention?
Yeah, I mean, the regulation definitely has a place. It certainly sets a bar and a standard for everybody in the sandbox, and it defines the sandbox that everybody's in. So it makes expectations very clear across the board. We'll always need innovation. Right, like I don't think standards are enough and regulations aren't enough. So right, like we'll always need the innovators and the mavericks to sort of that culture of continuous improvement, and sometimes it comes from the regulators as well in terms of advancing their standards and regulations. But I'm really interested in sort of the interplay between standards and sometimes the complacency that comes with that. It's like, where it becomes a checkbox exercise or some complacency, we've met the standards, which is great and was fine, but we also still need to drive things forward and that improvement
something
piece.
A little extra, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you see that in standards where the concepts of evaluation and updates and are baked into the requirements, and that can help drive things forward and sort of spark that innovation and keep the learning going. So that's one way to do it. In terms of who's driving the dialogue,
Who's driving the vehicle?
right? And maybe it's more like a bus, right?
Okay.
And we're all on the bus because I think that there's really strength and really power in a multiple of different voices. So there's a really complex ecosystem in the space around safer gambling and responsible gambling. I think one voice that we probably could tap into a little bit more is the voice of the player. Especially in terms of normalizing and destigmatizing tool use in terms of what works, right?
Tool use.
Yeah, like limit setting tools and those kinds of things in terms of how to position those, what works, what doesn't work.
You think there's a stigma around using?
Yeah, like so I think it's like I like the seatbelt analogy more than the training wheel analogy, right? Like no one wants to use training. You want to get the training wheels off as quickly as you can, right? Like so if the association with the tools is that you're not experienced enough or not, right? And why do you need to like so
you're weak that you need.
Yeah. And so I think in order to normalize the use in a way we don't think that much about putting the seatbelt on, we have to engage players in evaluating and testing and piloting things with them to understand, and all types of players. There's an incredible amount of diversity in terms of different lines of business and different players there. Demographics and ethnocultural consideration to what tools are appropriate and what messaging is important. So I think engaging players more in the design of, especially around prevention messaging and prevention tools, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, but I guess players won't be able to lead the dialogue on prevention, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Should it be some regulatory bodies or?
I think. I think organizations like RGC have an important role to play in bringing different stakeholders together, because I think that ultimately organizations like RGC and others that have relationships throughout the different stakeholders groups that can build trust amongst those different groups. Unfortunately, everyone has a bias and you're going to be judged by that bias. But building trust amongst those stakeholders groups so you get to the learning, you get to asking the right questions and being able to test and learn, I think is important.
What do you think the future of gambling harm prevention is in 2024? Like, where do we go next? What's the next stop on our bus?
Yeah, I like the bus analogy. Thank you. I think there's around the space around interventions and interactions. Some people don't like the intervention sounds kind of serious, but the interactions with players, there's been a tremendous amount of work done on identifying player risk, right? Like classifying players into high risk and low risk and assessing players based on player behavior and markers of harm. So we know a lot with the data that we have about players. We know a lot about their behaviors and what's working and what might not be and what might be dangerous and unsafe play. What we then do with that information, how we engage and interact in an effective way, what effective interactions actually look like, what are the outcomes that we're seeking with those players across all levels of the spectrum. I think there's been, quite a bit of work done on engaging and interacting with the high-risk players, and whether it's shutting them out of an account or engaging with them, but all levels of players, all players have needs and need interactions of different sorts. And whether it's just sending the messages or the type of messages that they're sent or the type of, games they're provided and have access to, I think there's a lot of work on messaging across the spectrum and effectively, proactively engaging. I think a lot of the information we're providing to players is very, very static. So if you have questions and you could find the information, it might be there, but it's rarely pushed out in terms of being more front and center with players. So I think there's some work to be done there across the spectrum around being more proactive.
How can we be proactive?
I think around when you see, it's interesting. I mean, one example is around incentivizing tool use, right? Like if we've a lot of people have spent a lot of time and money building tools, limit setting tools, and not a lot of players are using them,
right?
Right. But what if you gave them, incentives, bonuses, and not necessarily. There's a lot of controversy around whether it should be, player-based incentives, but partnerships with other entertainment, other merchandise, across different loyalty programs. If you could incentivize those tool uses to get the uptake and increase there, I think, and that's not for a high risk player. Like that would be a sort of a prevention activity, a tool that would go further up the spectrum and be further upstream.
Absolutely. Okay, I guess that wraps it up for me. I don't have any questions for you left. You said it very well, perfectly. Anything you might want to add?
No, thank you for the opportunity. It's been great to come visit Casino Guru and meet you all.
It's been great to have you here, Tracy. Thank you for all your insights. It's been very valuable. And thank you for being a part of All Things Gambling. And thank you all for watching us and for being a part of conversation. Leave us a comment below. Tell us what you think about the prevention. And don't forget to stay tuned for more engaging content from Casino Guru's All Things Gambling webinar series. Until next time, bye.